Greetings, Dr. Mark Winton here from the University of Central Florida, and I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about an article by Professor Peter Cilia, and this article is called Influencing Public Policy. An Embedded Criminologist Reflects on California Prison Reform, and this was published in the Journal of Experimental Criminology, Volume 4, pages 335 to 356 in 2008. This is an excellent article that really, I think, gives us a good idea about making policy in different criminal justice settings. So on the first page, I have a link to the actual article, so you can read the full article there, and also you can review some of the really good work at the Center for Evidence-Based Corrections. So a lot of policy-based stuff there as well. Now, I just refer to this article as the Embedded Criminologist, and so Professor Peter Cilia is really going to get into all of the aspects of policy making and policy implementation and evaluation in that regard. So, Governor Schwarzenegger in California wanted to reform the correction system. And what did he do? He did something that I think is a great example of what every politician should be doing when it comes to policy making. He found a very well-known, highly respected, knowledgeable academic researcher, someone who knows policy. And so he wanted to be very tough on crime, but he also wanted to offer rehabilitation because he believed that he could have a reduction in recidivism with rehabilitation. And the Department of Corrections in California had actually got rid of its research division at some point. And so now he's bringing it back, and he's bringing in people that know the area, are experts, and know research. And so he wanted to have someone guide him, and Professor Peter Cilia was the perfect person for that particular task. And Dr. Peter Cilia was appointed as special advisor for policy planning and research. And so, in essence, the Department of Corrections in California reopened their research division. Now, if we look at some of the aspects regarding policies, you can see that that the governor had a mess on his hands, and that the policy really went from a rehabilitation one to a warehousing one, which then led to a crisis. Just like with the opioid crisis we have now, you could have seen it coming. You saw all the markers, and we failed to intervene. The same thing happened in the Department of Corrections in California, the failure to intervene, the failure to stop what was creating more problems. So the governor focused attention on rehabilitation, research, policy analysis, and evidence-based programming. And Peter Cilia, I think, points out something very important and states that, that research should inform policy but not make it. So research should inform policy but not make it. Now you can read the article to look at all the details about what Professor Peter Cilia went through, and some of the finer tuned aspects of being a policy analyst and consultant in a huge system, especially this system of corrections in this case. But I think the professor has some excellent lessons, and she has these lessons listed, 7 of them, and I'm just going to go over those real briefly. And I highly suggest you actually click on the link and get the actual article. But lesson 1, research matters, but it must be relevant, and it also must be understandable. And that's that communication of policy that I've stressed. And I know that's difficult. It's difficult for someone who's trained in, for example, highly complex statistical procedures to go ahead and take those findings and then bring them into an explanation that anyone basically in the public can understand. And that can be difficult, especially when there's some limitations that need to be mentioned, and we don't want to give too much credit for what may not be a causal connection but appears to possibly be one. And so, I mean, there's all these things we have to be aware of. Second, know your audience and their resource constraints. So there's certain recommendations that we make as policy researchers in criminal justice, but there are certainly the financial and budgetary constraints. And that happens in any system that I'm aware of, at least in the public sector. Lesson 3 is timing is important. So when there's a crisis, politicians are going to look for those that can assist them, those who can either reduce the crisis or reduce the public perception of a crisis, or make it seem like someone's doing something or someone's actually doing something and helping. And then showing and demonstrating with research how that help occurred and the positive outcomes. And if there's negative outcomes, that would of course be important to discuss as well. Lesson 4 is focus on program implementation. Lesson 5 is to use rigorous research, and so there we'd want to have randomized designs. For example, we'd want to make sure that we're sampling appropriately, that we're analyzing our data appropriately, and so forth. And then lesson 6 is that public criminology is very demanding work, and it's very different from academic work, which of course is also demanding, but on very different time schedules. That I'll give you an example. I've done consulting work before where there may be a 2-day period to turn over some information or some literature or an opinion or something of that sort, 48 hours. In contrast, in the academic setting, depending on if you're on a tenure track line or not, for example, I don't have a requirement to publish since I'm on a instructor-lecturer line. So whether I publish 1 article a year, no articles in the year, or 10 articles in a year, it doesn't matter in terms of my employment. And so I'm on a very different schedule. Sometimes there might be gaps of a bunch of years in between my research publications, and that is because I'm working slowly on it, refining it, but I have that luxury in that sense. If I was on a tenure track schedule, I'd have to really be publishing much more. And if you're working in a applied setting, for example, corrections or law enforcement agency, they're going to tell you what they want. They're going to say, we need this delivered, in 6 weeks. We need this research carried out and a report presented to the police chief in a month. So it's very different in that regard. And then also, and then finally, lesson 7 is criminal justice research does not drive policy, but can help it. And there's a lot of debate on how involved should academic researchers in criminology and criminal justice be in informing policy, driving it, or sometimes even getting into advocacy roles. And you can read about those debates, of course. But I think this article just provides an excellent overview of the criminal justice expert working at the, working in the Corrections Institute and carrying out research and evaluation and really applying that to making sensible, helpful, and important policy. Thank you.